super excited. Today on Talk Tuesday, we're talking about some financial matters, and financial matters are always interesting to everybody. We have our guest is Beth Kraszewski. Beth Kraszewski is a comprehensive financial planner and investment manager. She works with Purposeful Wealth Advisors based in Chicago, but it's my understanding she serves clients from coast to coast and can provide us with a wealth of information, not only to do with investments, but also family, how it relates to everybody, and how to live purposefully. Isn't that right, Beth?
It is. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for saying that financial matters are on the top of everyone's mind and very exciting, because I don't know that everyone's quite there, but certainly we know that they're really important. And we know that the decisions that people make with their money impact their relationships in their lives. And especially the stakes are really high with that when it comes to divorce. So thank you for having me on.
You are welcome. We are happy to have you. We're happy to have this chat with you. And we're going to answer some questions when we get them. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
So again, my name is Beth. I grew up originally in Kansas and went to school in Nebraska. I've been in Chicago for 20 years. I'm going to make a very, very quick story, hopefully, but when I was in college, I had studied abroad in Africa. And when I was there, there was a situation where people were very, very poor, how we would define them, but at the same time, they were sharing their food with each other, taking care of each other's children, singing and dancing, and they were so rich in so many ways. And then fast forward a few years, I worked at one of the most premier wealth institutions in the world with very, very high net worth people. And I saw people who were upset and sad and had dysfunctional lives. And so what I learned is that more money can mean more problems, but that when people are intentional about the decisions that they make with their money, so not only making the right technical decision, but making the decision that impacts their vision for what they want for them and the people around them. So that's what we combine. We combine the technical aspects of money along with the relational aspects of money. So.
Yeah, that's a good combination, because as you know, what we do, we're, a divorce firm. We work with a lot of the, relationships issues, and it's great to be intentional. And I think intentional is on a lot of people's minds. But when you're going through the divorce process, that some people need a lot of guidance when you're talking about what's intentional, what's best for them, what's going to happen in the future. Do you work with a lot of people that are going through divorce specifically?
We do. So it used to be that we worked with people post-divorce quite often. Usually people didn't work, or what we had found was that people reached out to us after the divorce. The decree was in place and they sort of woke up and said, okay, what do I do with this now? How do I make my life of this? For whatever reason, we've had a lot more clients reaching out to us before or during the divorce process lately. One question I'm really curious to ask the two of you also is that, like you had mentioned, during the divorce, you're helping people navigate sort of the relationships and the emotions of the divorce. One thing that I find is sometimes it's very difficult for people because they're going through this horribly stressful emotional time. It's hard to sometimes get people to think about these bigger financial issues that could have huge impacts on their lives. What are the two of you doing to help your clients keep that in sight? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, that sometimes the finances are just difficult for people to have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, it's, the problem is it's not just, that's not their only problem, right? So they could be dealing with, God, my husband just cheated on me. So that whole turmoil is going through their head. And then the divorce itself is very stressful. And, we're asking them to put together documents and stuff like that. And so I think, when it just comes to thinking about what are we going to do with the money that maybe her husband always invested and she didn't have much hands-on with, it just is so overwhelming. So I think it just takes time. I don't think you can kind of move people faster than they're ready to go. But the people that come to the table, I guess, and have already decided they want the divorce instead of the other way around, they've had some time to wrap their head around it a little bit. And so those types of people are easier to, refer to somebody like yourself so that they can really get a grasp of where they're going with their finances in the future. But it's a traumatic event. We get that. And so we just do the best we can to move them towards, the completion of it.
Yeah, and we tell our clients, I mean, there is no doubt about it that a divorce is financially, emotionally, physically draining. All three of those come into play. And what Kim has said is right, because when you think about it, they're in the process of a divorce. It's a very, very difficult time, but you got to say, you got to think of where you're going to be in 5 years, or what do you need in 5 years? Or let's talk about this now, because I know you got to get through this now, but you've got to make a plan for the future, what you need and what you may or may not have. So that's where you would come in. You would be an invaluable resource to some of our clients, I believe, because they need some advice and some structure, because they can't think of everything right now. And a planner like yourself, I'm assuming, has great ideas for people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, Jan, I don't think that we've talked about this before, but that 5-year vision, I use 3 years. I don't think there's much of a difference, but that's what I always encourage people to look at, right? Like the day they wake up from the divorce may not be the best day of their life necessarily, but if they're able to keep that long-term view, say, I always tell people to ask the question, when I'm here 3 years from today, what do I want to have seen happen during that time to feel like I'm happy, that I'm happy with the progress that I made? And if people, I think, can keep their vision on that 3 years or 5 years out, I probably, from a variety of aspects in divorce, I think it helps them to, to make good decisions during the divorce and take a long-term view. But I think, Jan, you were starting to ask, like, what role do we play when we come in and help people with divorce? And there's a few mistakes that I'll typically see people make during divorce. I think one is that a lot of times clients, and I know that clients of Anderson and Boback do not fall in this situation, but sometimes, people will say, okay, we're going to just split the assets 50-50, and then they do it, and that so not all assets are equal. So I always say there's not necessarily bad assets to get, like this is the right good asset and this is the bad one, but it's important that people understand the tax impact, especially of those assets, because $100,000 in a retirement account is not the same as $100,000 in cash, or even that's invested in stocks. So that is, how do you all advise your clients? Like, how far deep do you all go with helping them understand, like, tax ramifications or, in those decisions when they're splitting up assets?
Well, a lot of times we work with accountants ourselves because we don't give the tax advice, but we too understand and try to get our clients to understand, particularly when we're talking about retirement accounts. I've had so many people say, well, he'll keep his and I'll keep mine, but they're not, sometimes it's apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so we've got to talk with financial planners, we've got to talk with accountants, because everything seems to have a tax ramifications. And we've had a new tax law regarding maintenance, and that's also impactful.
Absolutely. And so, it used to be that there was some flexibility and options on how that was handled, and now that's not the case. So, there's a lot of tax considerations to happen. And I agree, working very closely with the accountant during the process is definitely, I think, of benefit as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we do have a question here, Beth, if you want to answer this one. This person is asking, in my divorce, I am feeling anxious and stressed all the time. I really don't have the energy to deal with the financials. How can I get started? Because I never had to deal with the financials, and I feel like he's cheating me out of money. And I guess it depends, pre-decree versus post-decree, but he wouldn't have any control, I guess, over post-decree, but.
Right, I agree. So I hate to point this back at, I believe that it's good to have a team when people go into a divorce. Number one, you have to make sure you have the right attorney. But I think also either bringing the CPA or the financial planner in. I am nearly complete with what's called a certified divorce financial analyst. So that is a type of training that people can look for. And I think the approach is when I'm working with people going through divorce, and what obviously I clearly think it's the best solution. I'm sure there's others that are wonderful as well. But I think like my goal is to not overwhelm clients with too many of the details at that point, that I try to do the analysis for them and bring the, here's the finding, here's the bullet points, so that there's not this overwhelm on trying to understand all the details, but knowing that there's someone there that they can trust to look out for them. What do you all suggest in that situation?
How do I get started?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I think a lot in their lives with divorce is like literally little baby steps in everything. And that's like, if you wanted to lose weight, you take a little baby step. If you want to become familiar with your financials, you can set up appointments, obviously with someone like yourself or their accountant, just so they can kind of wrap their head around what it is that they're talking about. Because so many people don't know the difference between a 401k versus the pension. There's like different things. And so kind of the education, I always think, is something that kind of empowers people. They don't feel like so helpless and so like I have no idea what's going on in my life. They're like adrift. But when they get some knowledge, and even if that's like go taking a class at the college or just doing something that makes you more aware of what's going on in your life, I always think that always just empowers people more and they feel less adrift.
Yeah, it's like that advice goes with certain things in life that I think often as women, or maybe it's just type A women, but we tend to set these goals and it's like, okay, if I can't get it 100% right, then I don't even want to do it at all. And I think what people need to understand is every little bit of financial empowerment that they take on during the divorce is going to make a difference. So even if they're not able to fully understand the tax return and fully understand all the assets and fully understand that just by running their credit report, by understanding what assets they have, by any of those little steps will make a positive impact and not feel like they have to go for 100% in order to have a benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've run across that recently, and my client was like, I don't know if I'm on this card. I don't know if I should worry about that card. And I said, go run your credit report. You run your credit report and you're going to see exactly where your obligations lie. And then we get your spouse's credit report. We put it together and we really have a complete picture, at least, of what's out there.
Right, between the credit report and the tax return, you can pretty much, unless someone's truly hiding assets, you can really find about everything. The tax return can be overwhelming, though, if for people who aren't used to looking at that. But the tax return and the credit report, I feel like, has a bulk of the information that's needed.
I think a credit report could be a little bit overwhelming. Those
Yeah.
are pretty technical too.
Well, they're disturbing because you're like, when did I do that? And what is that?
Right,
even mine, I'm like,
when
what?
did I open that Victoria's Secret card? I haven't used that in 20 years. It's like, oh, I forgot to close that one. Yes, it can get a little overwhelming.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. What
Jan,
happens?
here's a question for you. It says, when approaching divorce, often at least one of the spouses is determined to keep the home. What issues can result from this?
Yeah, a lot of times we're faced with someone wanting to keep the home, and it is an interesting issue because you can have an appraisal, you can know the value, you can know what you would list the house for, but when somebody wants to keep it, what do you do with all those extra fees? Because if you refi, you're going to have different fees than if you sell it. It may cost more or it may cost less, and can you even afford to keep the house? Those are the issues that we got to work through, and they really need someone to sit down and figure out, A, can they afford it, and B, can they qualify? What do you need to qualify for a refi? What if you're unemployed?
Well,
is maintenance enough sometimes?
It can be, but often it's not. And so actually, Jan, it depends on, where the mortgage is at, the value or the amount on the mortgage. But you hit the nail on the head right there, that most people don't realize that if they end up with the house, with the divorce, they have to refinance. The bank does not want one person owning the home and two people on the mortgage. Now, it's sort of a gray area of when that's actually comes to fruition for different people, but people have to be prepared that they may have to refinance. Quite often, because there's so much emotional ties for so many people with the house. And as I had mentioned, our goal is to combine both making the right technical decisions as well as the right relational decisions. So I would say that most often when we are working with the spouse who wanted to keep the house, quite often they'll keep it for a few years, and then with knowing that they're going to sell it at some point. And again, or maybe not, but and often they're open to selling it at some point. And it goes back to, Jan, what we were talking about before, that 3 to 5 year vision. So I think it's good for people to have a vision in place for that 3 to 5 years, but also a plan to say, I may not be, if I have to pay for this house, I may not be able to pay the school tuition for where my kids were going, or I may not be able to take go on a vacation or whatever. Like, people have to understand, if they're holding on to the house, that they will likely have to let go of something else.
Do you help them budget sometimes, or?
Yeah. Oh gosh, budget's like the 4-letter word in financial planning. It like makes everyone anxious, but we try to call it cash flow. It makes people relax a little bit better. But understanding what people are spending is really, really important, and it can be a painful process. So we've developed some steps and used some different technology to try to help people get a better sense of what they're spending. If anything, I always say, once you sort of get through the first step of putting a budget together, it is an amazing confidence building tool for people. Because I think what happens is people get scared, like, oh my gosh, I can't afford my lifestyle when I'm out, after my divorce, and they worry and they worry and they worry. And I find that once they get a plan together and actually know, here's what it is, here's a budget that I can live with that works for me, it can just reduce stress and help confidence moving forward. How many of your clients do you see that go through the steps to really figure out what their expenses are before divorce and sort of anticipate what they might be after the divorce?
We're getting more and more, I think, that are pre-planning. So more and more people are looking at that, I think, before they actually get a divorce. And sometimes we have clients that are with us a year or two that are thinking about the divorce and putting stuff in a row. Usually it's like parenting time. If they work too much, like slowing down a little bit so that they can spend time with the children. I see a lot of that right now, but I think I see more of my clients not realizing that they need to cut something out, that they can't spend like they used to. Like, kids' extracurricular activities is like the most prime example I can think of. The kids used to do this, hockey, and it's like, things are going to change. You're not going to have all this money. So I almost kind of see the opposite, that people are not realizing that they're going to have, this one income now has to pay for 2 families or two households.
Right. And that's sort of, I don't think a lot of people always realize that the income that was going to provide for one household is now going to have to provide for 2. So unless there was all this extra money before, which rarely there was, then something has to give. And again, I think that's also why, I keep going back to like that 3 or that 5 year question, for people to be really, really clear what it is that they want at the end of that 3 or 5 years. So then when they're making the decisions about the kids' activities or keeping the home or whatever it might be, that they can make sure that where they're spending their financial resources, where they're spending their emotional resources, is really getting them to where they want to be at the end of the day, when a few years after the divorce.
Yeah, we got a tool that we use, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, and the courts are requiring it. The state of Illinois requires everyone to fill out a financial affidavit. Mm-hmm. So when you sit down with a financial affidavit, then at least it brings to mind, oh yeah, this is what I pay for laundry. Oh yeah, I have to pay the guy to water my plant. So you really get a good picture of everything that you spend. And when you write it all down, sometimes it's shocking. So I'm wondering, do people overestimate their budget or cash flow, or do they underestimate what they say they spend, in your experience?
They almost always underestimate. And that financial affidavit is great. I wish it looked a little bit prettier and more fun. You sort of look at it and it feels like you're filling out a tax return. But, we use a combination. I do like the financial affidavit. There's also free tools out there. So we highly recommend Mint. So it's a free cash flow budgeting
Yeah.
software by Intuit. It's actually back in the old days, right? It was Quicken.
How do
And
you spell
now
that? Did you
it's
say mint?
MINT, like that you're making
Okay,
a mint.
mint.
Yes, so it's Mint. And you can aggregate, like, so you would put in, user IDs and passwords for checking accounts or credit cards. They don't have access to steal your money. They only have access to, so it allows for all the transactions that you had to flow through there. And I always recommend that people go back 3 to 6 months and categorize the expenses. Sometimes, anyways, I think that sort of looking at a combination, because the financial affidavit is really, really detailed, that can sometimes be overwhelming for people when they're trying to work with a free app like that. So, but between the financial affidavit and I love Mint to really help people understand, because what we will typically get from people, to answer your question, Jan, is people show us what their actual required expenses are, but they aren't counting for the eating out. They aren't accounting for, like, whether it's, we've been really picking on the kids' activities today, but I have 3 kids who need to have activities as well, but I think so at least. And so, people will forget like all of those other expenses that contribute to their lifestyle and how they're currently living.
Yeah. So what do you know about the second stimulus check? Is it coming or not?
I don't know.
I've heard rumblings about it.
Yeah, what's interesting, I know this probably doesn't help with any confidence. So I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and I feel, especially after this year, it's like the longer I'm in the business, the less I feel like I can guess what's actually going to happen these days, But that said, I think it's just really important for people to understand, their own financial situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's the biggest thing you've noticed with COVID-19 and your world?
I have seen a major uptick in divorce going on. And so with my non-divorced clients, one thing that has surprised me is how calm clients were for the most part through the market crashing in March and coming back. Unfortunately, I've seen a few clients who were very, very savvy business owners, and their lives now being shaken upside down. But it has been amazing to see the increase in divorce inquiries. Are you all seeing the same? What else are you all seeing with everything going with COVID-19?
Yeah, I've seen more.
We're seeing, and business is booming. There's no question about it. But I don't know if we've necessarily correlated it with COVID-19 at this point. I guess time will tell. When they call us, it's not, because of COVID-19, X, Y, and Z, but business is booming, but whether it's related or not, time will tell.
Yeah. A lot of parenting issues.
Of course.
Children stuck overseas. A lot of that litigation right now, we just had a child finally come back from India that was there since January, and how devastating it was for that poor mom to just hope and pray, that her kid was coming back. So a lot of that type of stuff that I'm seeing directly related to COVID. But yeah, divorce itself, nobody has come to the door and said, my God, I've had to quarantine with this person and I can't stand another day. Nobody has said that to me yet. But yeah, if it's already weak though, for sure, it's not going to get any stronger. So
yeah. We had a client that was divorced, and one of the spouses was going to be leaving the state to go to one of the high-risk states now defined by the city of Chicago. And it's not solved yet. There's all sorts of issues going on with that. Have you all run into this with anyone yet?
Oh, yeah.
Every day.
What advice do you have for people going through this on either side of it?
You know what we do? We try to tell them to work it out with the spouse, because, everybody parents differently. Everybody has a different idea of what's prudent. but it all comes down to what's best for your children. And you got two people who aren't married anymore, two different sets of rules, two different households. They're going to have to come together and come to a resolution, or they're going to have to talk to a mediator to try to resolve it, or they're going to have to file a motion. And, you know, of course, that's the last resort, but there's a lot of motions being filed about, please don't let my child go to Florida. Please don't let my child go back to school when we can homeschool. You know, please bring my child back from, you know, another state where they've been. So like Kim says, we've had a lot of litigation about parenting time, particularly during the shelter in place order. You know, do they go back and forth to other parents' homes? And so that certainly has been a challenge.
Yeah. And although we have, you know, the governor, you know, at that time had said the parenting orders should take place, you know, and go forth. And even our chief judge said the same thing, like enforce the court orders. But there's always like that one thing, you know, like, well, what happens if my child has, you know, special, like, you know, their immune system is not so good, or they live with an elderly grandparent and they could possibly infect the grandparent. So there's all those little side issues that are not making it a clear cut. I don't think there's anything really in our area of law that's clear cut.
I heard someone describe on a radio show today that right now, all of our lives in general with COVID, it's like we're in a blender and the top's not on. And it's like, you know, we're like moving, or I heard someone else describe, like, it's like you're playing multiple games of chess. And as soon as you're about ready to make a move, someone throws your pieces on the ground. Like, I think in general, it's hard for anyone to be making decisions, you know, right now. And so I think we see the challenges being very high, you know, a lot of challenges going on with, you know, parents who aren't married on trying to navigate these decisions on school and all of these, you know, traveling and all, seeing grandparents and all those issues. So.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about school next week on our Talk Tuesday, and that's really a difficult subject. I don't know the parents who have to make those decisions. It certainly is a tough call. We have our other partner who's not on with us today, Jessica Marshall, says, boy, this week's been a long year, which makes me chuckle every time she says it, because I think it's really everyone can relate to that.
Right. It's just, yeah, it's difficult. It's a very, very difficult time to navigate. And I think it's just like you should during a divorce. It's just like one day at a time, like make the best decisions with the information that we have at that time. But it's very challenging.
Yeah.
You know, Beth, I was wondering if you have clients, a husband and a wife, and they've been your clients for a long time, and they then decide to get divorced. What's your role?
So I am, as a soon-to-be certified divorce analyst, I can show financial projections that have to be in the best interest of both. So I cannot represent one client or over the other. So I would provide, you know, analysis to show just, it is not my place to say, here's what you should do, but it's my place to say, if you decide this on the maintenance, or if you split the assets this way, here are the impacts of it, to show them the, you know, the analysis of how that works. Quite often what will happen after the divorce is that typically one client, I shouldn't say it, sometimes I do have both clients stay with me, but I think it's typically good for a divorced spouse to have separate financial representation, either possibly during divorce, depending on how contentious the divorce is, and very often after the divorce. I think it makes sense for each spouse to have their own financial planner for the most part.
What if they fight over you?
That the spouse with the most money, though, takes the financial advisor with them, you know? And so the one that's like left behind is like, God, as it is, you know, that person's got the most money, they know what's going on, and then they take the financial advisor with them, which is particularly hurtful, you know? It's like yet another trusted person in their life is just abandoned them.
Yeah, for sure. And I will tell you, I think there's only been a handful of couples where I worked with them jointly during the divorce. I think there was only 3, and one of them, they are both still clients. It was amicable. But in the other 2 situations, it had nothing to do with size of assets. It had to do with just one of the spouses just resonated more with me than the other. So I didn't fire either of the clients. One of them chose to leave, that it was better to have separate representation for that. So
Mhm. Here's a question for you, Kim. The question is it better to take more property or should I take the maintenance?
Yeah, there's no answer for that, you know? I mean, if it just so depends on the circumstances in the case, you know? Do you ever get that question, Beth?
I do. And again, it depends on the situation. The one thing I would say to keep into consideration is that everyone needs liquidity. What liquidity is cash, meaning that everyone, you know, needs to have income available to them. So I did have a client who had negotiated and they ended up getting a lot more of the retirement assets, but there was sufficient cash there and income to be able to cover their immediate needs. So if someone's going to take all the property, they just need to make sure there's a plan to like buy groceries next week and pay rent next week and pay the mortgage next week.
Yeah, because you could have money like if you're dating and you're thinking of getting married in the next year or two, you know, the last thing you want to do is say, okay, I'll take the maintenance in lieu of, you know, a higher cash, you know, a distribution of the marital estate, and then you get married, you know, and then there goes your maintenance. So
Right.
every case is going to be different as far as that goes and the planning of it. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That is an excellent point. Let's take more assets and less maintenance, and then you're right. Then you really kind of win on both sides.
Yeah, the kind of kicker on that, and I have an interesting case like that too, where you know if there's a living together, then it's not you don't have to stop paying maintenance. You're going to pay it even if they live together. But I had a case a couple years ago where they didn't go through a marriage; they went through a commitment ceremony, and so it's like by all aspects a marriage ceremony, you know. So it didn't ever like get litigated, but I would have loved to have seen what the judge would have said about that, because it was like everything, the white gown, the whole, like you're just getting married, but it's called a commitment ceremony instead of a marriage. And so he still has to pay even though she's committed to somebody else and he's living in their house, and it's all in the wording of the agreement. You got to be really careful.
For sure.
Yeah. We have a lot of great stories. Do you have a lot of great stories?
That are appropriate to tell on Facebook Live?
Probably not.
Yes, it's, you know, it's a very, obviously going through a divorce is a very, very stressful time for people, and it brings out all sorts of, I think the main thing is I think people are embarrassed a lot. And, you know, I see that people are embarrassed sometimes about what they're going through, or they're embarrassed that they don't know about the assets, or they're embarrassed that whatever. And I always say, like, there's nothing that we haven't seen before. Like, this happens. Like, people shouldn't feel embarrassed about how they're coming. You know, divorce is it's rarely ever pretty. And so I don't see it. Do you all run into that? Like, that your clients are showing up and just feeling like embarrassed about that they haven't done the work that they needed, or leading up to divorce, or anything such as that?
I would say anger is more the appropriate. Like, I didn't realize he bought a house for his girlfriend, or, you know, like some sort of big chunk in their life that they just can't believe they didn't see it, you know? Mm-hmm. And so there might be a little bit of embarrassment in there, but I think more anger is the more prevalent emotion that I see.
Right. Well, you know what it is? It's my experience. What I notice is that infidelity is rampant. Infidelity is the cause of a lot of divorce. And when infidelity is involved, people, gosh darn it, they're mad. Yeah. And when they're mad, it's hard to wrap your head around, okay, I can be mad and reasonable at the same time. But I do have this one story that I want to share. I was at a prove up. We were getting ready to finalize the divorce. She was all about it, couldn't wait to get divorced. And he was kind of sad. He really didn't want to get divorced. They'd been married a long time. And we're sitting in the courtroom, and we're all sitting there, and she starts whistling. And I'm like, you really can't whistle and hum and like be so joyful right now. It's just really not a good idea. So I had to keep her from like whistling Dixie all the way out of the courthouse. but she was so happy. And you don't see that
Yeah,
a lot.
that
You really
smoker,
don't.
that smoker's kick. Remember back in, I don't know, in the 80s or something when they would kick the habit and the guy would jump up and click his heels together? I had somebody do that in court one time. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You can't,
But most
you
of
can't
the
do
time, even though, they've been going through it for a while, we finally get to the last day. It's pretty common to see some tears. It's pretty
Yeah.
common to see them, be very kind and gracious to each other. Semi-common, semi-common. I guess maybe not all the time, but
Yeah.
it's a difficult time, and we work hard to get it done for them and to keep everybody as intact, the family is intact as we can.
Which is what I'm sure you do, Beth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there's a lot of talk now about like how to approach a divorce, whether collaborative, mediation. Sometimes I also wonder, like for some of my clients where they see things are going to be really contentious in the beginning, should they just sort of speed track to a trial? What are your thoughts? Like, what are you all seeing as far as the mix
Yeah.
of, or how people should go about approaching that decision?
Yeah. Collaboration's a great way to go, but we all collaborate. We all like try and settle a case. We all try to come with because litigation's costly. So we all try to think of a solution besides litigation. But when you've got somebody that's just mad, it's going to be hard to get them to the table and collaborate because they don't trust him, or they don't trust her, especially if there's some cheating. How do you, the trust is gone. So how do you sit down and collaborate something when there's so little trust? So that's a big hurdle, but every single one of us in this field collaborates. We try to come up with the best solution for you without litigating, because that's crazy expensive and crazy hurtful, especially if you have children. The last thing you want to do is get up there and just start, dragging the other person down, because you're going to see them for the rest of your life if you have children. So we try to stay away from the litigation mode if we can. But, at some point, if you've got somebody on the other side that's just not reasonable and you can't get, like somebody won't give my guy parenting time, I'm not going to sit and talk to death, for a year on that. I'm going to be like, we're going to trial because he needs to see his kid. We can't just talk about this for a whole year.
Right.
So it depends. Everything depends.
Well, and that's what I just had a couple recent scenarios where I was, again, like it's, the word litigation, it's like, let's avoid it at all costs. But there's also times where maybe the writing was on the wall from the beginning that just, time and fees and everything were wasted by attempting to be collaborative when there's no way that it could have, I shouldn't say no way, but the signs were there that type of, divorce would not be effective.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me how people can think that a guy or a woman in a black robe is going to make decisions about your life, knows better than you. But people do want to give that power away. Some have to because the other side demands it, and some want to. But it's a difficult decision. It's a decision that I don't think is oftentimes the best, but it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we try to stay away from it. I know people, I don't know, they must feel like vindicated, like they're going to get up there and they're going to say their side, and then the judge is going to be like, you're right, you win, and so you could be right and you could win, but it may still not be the best outcome for you, so not every case is like that, of course, and every case is different, but yeah, primarily if trial is our last go-to, we really try our best to keep them from having to go to trial. But
yeah.
Beth, do you do divorce or financial mediation for divorcing couples, or only your own clients?
I have not at this point done that. So really this divorce practice is something that's been growing naturally for me over the last 5 years. And so it'll be interesting to see where that process goes. As of right now, I'm not planning on that, but yeah, as of right now, no.
Well, thanks for joining us. This has been great. We've got a lot of information, and it's been lovely talking to you on this Tuesday.
Same to both of you.
Do you have any closing statements you want to give people, how they can reach you, or?
Yeah, so our website is www.purposeful, Wealth Advisors. My phone number is 773-975-4020. I won't give you my phone or my email address, mainly because my last name is just so too darn tough to spell. So finding the website or calling is much easier to grasp.
Okay, and I kudos to you, Beth, and I would highly recommend you to our listeners who need some wealth management, some investment management, and we really appreciate you joining us today and appreciate all you do. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and until we can see you in person, be well.
Thank you, and you too. And I want to say that my experience with both of you has just always been a very practical approach to divorce. And I know, a lot of times people have these extreme emotions during a divorce, and I've always found the two of you just to be very grounding, like that anchor just to hold, to guide people through that time. So I know people are in great hands with both of you.
Thank you for saying that. We really appreciate that. We work really hard for that. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Bye.
We'll see you all next week on Talk Tuesday.